Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Impact Policy Podcast. My name is Sam Johnson. I'm the Managing Director here at Impact Policy, and today I'm joined by my friend Jarin. She's going to have a big yarn to us about all things trading black, Aboriginal procurement, her personal journey, throughout her career that's, spanned many different sort of spaces and places, which I'm sure will be a really interesting and powerful yarn for a lot of you to hear and take away from. We'll touch on some of the most pressing and complex sort of things that we're experiencing as Aboriginal business owners, community as well, maybe more broadly too. And just excited to share some space and finally get you on the couch for a bit of a yarn. So I might just hand it to you first and let you tell whoever's listening a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and all that sort of stuff. But before I do that, I will take a quick moment to pause and acknowledge country. We're here on Bidjigal country here in Coogee. I want to take a moment to pay my deepest respects to our elders, both past and present, but also recognise that this content is going to be consumed across many countries and nations, both here in Australia and abroad as well. I want to acknowledge and recognise that wherever you're hearing or watching this from today, that you're on Aboriginal land. You're here, never ceded by treaty. So with that, thank you so much for sharing space with us, and over to you.
Thanks for having me, Sam. That was a deadly intro there, eh?
Hey, look out.
Appreciate that pause as well. I'm Jarren. I am proudly a Wiradjuri woman. My family's from Arambi in Cowra, central western New South Wales.
God's country.
Yes, I was born in Western Sydney. I grew up in Waterloo, Redfern, Alexandria, my sort of primary school years. And then my teenage years all out at Western Sydney. So I don't know if you know Riverstone.
Yeah,
just
true.
past Blacktown. Spent a lot of time out there, but we moved around a fair bit. So, lived in Bathurst for a while growing up as well. So,
there you go.
Yeah, but my family are from Cowra.
Yep.
And also from Redfern. So those are the places that feel home.
Yeah, two very strong, staunch Aboriginal spaces and communities and countries. You describe yourself as a city girl, country girl? Where you see yourself in the world?
Yeah, that's a hard one, hey, because, probably a bit of both.
Yeah,
I went from like the city kid in Waterloo in my Nikes and then went out to the bush, and I, growing up, at one point was riding in rodeos, so make that make sense. I'm a bit of all of it. Love my country music.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm none of the above. I'm all of the above.
Yeah, go. Yeah, best of both worlds.
That's it.
And so maybe you can take us, for people who are listening, you do a stack of different stuff. You're not just, in one space and place. Can you tell our listeners or people watching along sort of what some of your main roles are and the impacts that you have in community and in different sectors too?
Yeah, I actually find that question really hard to answer. And, I know earlier we were talking about like how do I introduce myself? I find that really difficult. I can say who I am, where I'm from, who my mob is. And I did forget to mention I'm an Ingram Simpson. That's all my family from out that way. But in terms of what I do now, so my primary role now is I'm CEO of Wayanga Aboriginal Aged Care Program. So we are based in Redfern. We're an Aboriginal service provider, Aboriginal community controlled organisation that's been in Redfern for 30 years. Started by a community and continues to be led by the founding directors.
Yeah, okay.
And we essentially look after elders in their own homes in the city. I'm so humbled and proud to do this work and, follow those legacy and those footsteps of that organisation. But, yeah, I do a stack of things.
Yeah.
So...
Pioneering a lot of sort of black business work for a long time, I think. And when I first came across you, because we're probably not too dissimilar in our age, but, growing up, you were probably out west when I was in the city or vice versa. And so when I first started coming across a lot of your online stuff, it was really largely through, Jarin Street, and got one of them mats at home and,
thank you.
All that sort of stuff there too. But yeah, so I'm cutting you off, but, that sort of world is a big part of what you do as well too.
Yeah, so I think I stepped into retail, and it's retail, you know, because I grew up watching my aunties painting and creating product all the time, and it always tended to be the women doing that stuff too. I've always been a creative, but I think, you know, at one point in my early 20s, I did go into a government role. And for those that don't know, I served as a New South Wales police officer for just shy of 13 years. And I think throughout that journey, I disconnected to that creative.
Yeah, of
and
course.
so the creation of Jarren Street was born out of this. It was almost like a desperation to reconnect to that creative, but it was also, you know, I just saw like a gap where people were practicing like well-being, and they were doing exercises, and, you know, I'm a sporty person. I've played sport my whole life.
Yeah.
And I just felt like at the time in creating that brand, it was about reminding people, you know, and you mentioned in that introduction that no matter where you are, you're on Aboriginal land. And I felt like that was really missing in physical movement, in gym spaces, you know, in all those well-being spaces.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to, whether it was conscious or subconscious, plant that like right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm real like inconspicuous.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
so that was where that came from. And, you know, I was still in that government role when I created the business. Eventually I leaned and left that job. No regrets there whatsoever. And
word.
leaned, it really was, you know, leaned full tilt into Jarin Street and creating this dynamic brand and something that I was really proud of. Worked with, you know, artists that were like, you know, really close to me. One's my auntie, one's my titter girl, you know. One of my friends, Liz, who is an incredible artist, you know, she wasn't feeling so confident in showcasing her artwork, and I thought she was brilliant, you know. Like, we played OzTag together for years and years. She used to paint up, like, tights and leggings for me and little things for my kids, and I was like, sis, we got to do something, you know. Like, you're so talented, let's just do something.
Yeah.
And it turned out that her first art piece is what started that business. So it started out as this, like, awesome, and it still is this awesome thing that I love. But I think during that journey of going into that business journey in retail, and it is retail, you know, I learned that the entire industry and Aboriginal culture, artworks, products, like the representation of blackfellas in business ownership was like next to none. And if we were there, we were like pigeonholed into markets and I was like, no, this is not okay. You know, why have we got these major non-Aboriginal owned corporations and businesses monopolising a market that is rightfully ours?
Absolutely.
Where's our economic pathway through this, you know? And, oh, God, I went all the way down that rabbit hole, didn't I?
I bet. I think I remember, I don't know if it was some content you shared recently or if I read it somewhere, because I know you've been quite vocal recently, raising awareness again about this sort of stuff, particularly coming into the holiday period. But there was something like 3% of the export of bush foods is only from Aboriginal businesses. So you got like 97% of that export market of kakadu plum and, you know, all our other bush foods are getting exported worldwide by non-Aboriginal companies.
Yeah,
it just blew my mind.
That's actually growing, because the last time I checked, it was like 1% or something.
Wow.
So if we're at 3%, it's I guess we've got a little bit more representation. But yeah, absolutely right. And so, like, you think about what that blockage is doing for our kids and our future generations. You know, where's our business acumen? Where's our intergenerational knowledge that's being passed on around those businesses? But ultimately, I think what the most disturbing part of that statistic and other statistics across, you know, branded product that is, and I didn't call it this, it's out there in the industry as Indigenous themed product.
Yeah.
Is that it is blackface.
Yeah.
So this feigned benevolence that there's something coming back to community that's making this huge, big impact. Well, you know, when I started out in Jarren Street, you know, you look out who your competitors are, and you have a look at the market, right? That's what you do in business.
Does, yeah.
And I was doing like, little experiments where I'd go into gift stores or airports or news agencies. And, I found that all these Indigenous themed product, I can't even say that without feeling a bit sick, was like leading with the artist and not the business.
Yeah.
And so I started Googling, like, let's have a look at these businesses. Who's owning it? And none of them were blackfellas.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, it was like, okay, that's great. You've engaged an artist, but we want the market. We don't want the scraps off the table.
Yeah, totally.
Like, you're profiting potentially internationally off us. This must be the only industry, like retail, where admitting that you're a white fella is like a real bad thing.
Yeah.
Like, when have you ever been persecuted for that?
Exactly.
So when we started trading black, I started just an Instagram page, and I started posting about like misleading marketing and like, I'm interested in sustainable economic pathways. I'm not interested in short wins.
Absolutely.
I want my grandkids to be secure, and I want them to have access to be able to have a business that they can lean into and not feel like they have to fight with others that don't understand cultural protocols and what's appropriate to put on a product and what's not. And I'm not saying that every Aboriginal person in the country has that awareness. Colonisation, we know, has impacted that.
Totally.
But we have a much better shot at that than Gabbars do.
Yeah, that's it. But it's also the reality that, like, so many of us are still battling the impacts of not just intergenerational trauma, but intergenerational poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're trying to start businesses off the back of, like, we're bootstrapping them.
Yep.
We've got no angel investors and, trust funds that are giving us a kickstart to get this stuff going. And so we're trying to compete with black-facing non-Aboriginal companies that are heavily resourced to... we just can't... We know we can compete in terms of product and culture and that, but we just cannot compete in terms of capacity.
Yep.
At scale. Yeah, manufacturing, all that sort of stuff.
And it also brings us back to a question, this is something that's been raised to me a few times around like Australian made.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Australian made. Like, we all want to support an Australian economy. Okay, but what does that really mean? Because like for black product, we don't have access to manufacturing factories. Yeah. We don't have that Bandara set up warehouse for generations with a sportswear brand that we can just churn it out en masse.
Totally.
We don't have that. So like, we have limited options, and as you said, we don't have angel investors. We don't have that intergenerational capital. Like, I was paying rent when I started my business, and even that was like not looking great,
Yeah,
so
100%.
It's like, okay, well, let's talk about Australian made. You go to an Australian made store that is trying to target tourism. Majority of the product they're selling is Indigenous themed.
Yeah.
So who owns those businesses and those products that you're flogging as Australian made? It's not us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in that context, Australian made really means like white Australian made.
Yeah, absolutely. So
if we're looking at that long-term impact, we definitely need to build capacity in those spaces, but we don't have access to them right now. So, when I say, you talk about like the why, I've seen aunties, particularly one of my aunties, where I've seen her in this space for so long and she works really hard, and she's just not able to break through to that next level because look at how saturated the market is.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
And I think, and then that sort of leads us into the risk, right? Because I guess what you're talking about with aren't there is a level of vulnerability in a sense of resources and capacity. And then we see the other risk around then, so businesses like us that are bootstrapping and doing our best to compete with these other competitors at mass and scale. Then there's the other end of that spectrum with what we see with joint ventures.
Yeah.
And we see, the saviour come in to partner to take us to that next level. And and sometimes that can be really authentic and do, you know, amazing stuff. There's plenty of examples of that out there.
Yep.
But sometimes it can also be extractive and, you know, detrimental and, you know, fraudulent, you know, for lack of a better term.
It is, yeah.
When you know, mob are on the books but not involved at all, you know, across any of that sort of stuff. But yeah, any of that sort of stuff that you want to talk to in that JV world.
So I want to caveat this yarn by saying I'm not against a joint venture.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that I am, and I'm not. But I want to speak about it in a retail context.
Mm-hmm.
The simple thing that myself and the other Trading Black founding members or Trading Black supporters and you know, thank you to everybody who's gotten behind the groundswell of support to direct retail market to 100% Aboriginal owned businesses. The people that get it have been amazing.
Yeah.
I think what we're ultimately asking for is just simple transparency.
Yeah. Yep.
And the misleading marketing. You talked about your experience there where you bought product and you thought it was mad, and it is mad, but then you dig a bit deeper and you realise, okay, it was actually created by a white fella. How do I feel about wearing this or buying this, or what is my real investment?
Totally.
The whole point of that 100% Aboriginal owned business is that the whole purchase is an investment in community, right?
Definitely.
So like the frustration around that misleading marketing, I think I want to just touch on the difference between black facing and black cladding for me, at least. These are my definitions.
Totally.
You know, a black-faced business is a non-Aboriginal owned business, but they got deadly artworks and they might use our words and they'll have Aboriginal models and, you know, in their sponsored ads that circulate online repeatedly that I got to block all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, it makes you look like you're investing in community where, look, I'm not going to deny that the engagement of an artist does pay an Aboriginal person, and the engagement of an Aboriginal model, I hope, also pays for, but they're short wins, right?
Absolutely.
That's not the business, and the purchase is ultimately an investment in that business. So that's the issue that I have with it. If you're a non-Aboriginal person trading in Aboriginal culture, just be honest about it.
Totally.
Don't hide it in your marketing.
Yeah.
Be upfront and let the consumer decide where they're going to place their money.
Yeah.
You know, that's all we're asking for. And to me, that's like just a reasonable expectation. I mean, it's illegal anyway to do misleading marketing.
Totally.
But, you know, for that space, how is it being regulated?
Definitely.
For us, it's not. Or at least we're not seeing it. But then in terms of black cladding, you know, now we're going into the procurement yarn, which to date I've stayed out of that. You know, Trading Black is about Aboriginal retail. My business is Aboriginal retail, so we've pushed for 100% Aboriginal owned businesses to be supported. We've called out the black facing stuff. If we get into the joint venture and the black cladding conversation, you know, what we're talking about there is ultimately non-Aboriginal control over what appears to be an Aboriginal business, right? That's the bottom line of what it is. And I think that conversation right there is a real big one.
Yeah, massively.
There's a lot of stakeholders in that one.
Yep.
I don't
big money too.
There you go. So
talking millions of dollars.
Yep,
absolutely. Yeah, we've seen it a lot in the public sector. You know, impact policy for the most part works with the public sector around social policy work. And we see the reality of what those procurement barriers put in place for Aboriginal businesses. And it's the same challenges you talk about in terms of competing at scale through a retail lens. We see the exact same thing, you know, in the public sector when you're competing through a procurement lens with some of these businesses. And
can I just touch on that there too? This is not just symptomatic in business. Like we see this in the NGO, the not-for-profit space too.
Yeah.
You're seeing NGOs blackface their businesses.
Yeah.
You're seeing non-Aboriginal organisations run at Aboriginal funding in front of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. We know this happens.
Yeah.
So the broader conversation is about impact, isn't it? And
absolutely.
I just don't understand, and this is the bit that I get really, you know, upset and frustrated about, is like, if you're a non-Aboriginal person, right, and you're claiming to support and help blackfellas and you're an ally, how can you, in good conscience, how can you on any level run over the top of mob to get there?
Totally.
You know, and
yeah,
there's no justification for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. There is no justification. And I think in many ways, I think that our in whether it's black cladding or black facing, I think if it's the black cladding and that sort of, JV sort of space, I think our people getting taken advantage of, whether fully conscious of it or not, and I think, those non-Aboriginal partners or those, non-Aboriginal leaders within those businesses know exactly what they're doing. And, where the flow-on effects are minimal, if any, back into our communities. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we see with the procurement policy at a state level is that, there's no weight around the percentage of an Aboriginal business in terms of how they're awarding contracts. So, scoring a 100% Aboriginal-owned business like ours compared to a JV that's 51%, the flow-on effects back to if our business would win it versus their business back into community significantly different.
Yeah.
Because of how closely connected we are to our communities, because of our ownership and leadership over our companies, as opposed to, companies at 51% with minimal, Indigenous leadership across the spectrum of it. So, yeah, that's where we really struggle, where we're just getting really frustrated that we feel like there needs to be some sort of a, revisit around how we score Aboriginal businesses when we are awarding tenders.
I couldn't agree any more with you. I think, the people who were around when that policy was developed in the early days, some deeply respected people there. And I think that we just need a revision of where the policy's at now and how it's landing in communities.
Yeah.
Certainly, in terms of black retail, the follow-on effects from that procurement space is coming over to retail in those definitions.
Yeah, okay.
A black business is 100% Aboriginal owned. That's it.
Yeah, 100%.
Anything less than that is a joint venture, a partnership, whatever terminology we want to talk about.
Definitely.
That's what that is. So,
Totally.
we do need to see, I want to see it in retail. Like I said, the procurement space needs a lot more voices and,
Definitely.
people that are a lot more experienced than me in that. But I'm seeing how that is impacting people on the ground in our community. And, I started out in I wanted to make active wear.
Yeah.
That's why I did it. And,
Yeah.
We're seeing those oppressive constructs in active wear.
Yeah,
It just blew, I don't know why it blew my mind, but it did blow my mind. And I was just so how I explained it was meant to be a piece for me to reconnect and to creative and to, that side of who I am. And it did, and it still does. And I love it, I'm standing by that. But I think just the heartbreak going from government and seeing all the barriers and the oppressive stuff that keeps us in cycles of disadvantage and keeps us from moving forward, all the feigned benevolence and all those issues, to then go into a space that I found so freeing and beautiful, and then to find the same constructs, I was devastated.
Yeah, yeah.
And then to talk to other mob who was trying to do what I was trying to do and break into mainstream retail markets and whatever. And they're feeling the same way.
Absolutely.
Oh, it was like I don't know why I was surprised, because I've worked in community my whole life. But I was, and I was really heartbroken.
Yeah, I bet. I want to ask you something now. It's sort of, it's a hard yarn because it can be a bit sort of, it can be sensitive, but we'll tread lightly around it. But there's a big thing for us that we feel around, whether it's in retail, whether it's in consulting, whether it's in services, whatever it is, but around also cultural capability of black businesses. And so, you know, you might have 100% Aboriginal-owned business, but perhaps, you know, perhaps the founder is on their own cultural journey. Maybe they've found out later in life, you know, that they're an Aboriginal person, and doesn't take away from any of that part of their story or their journey. But do you think that there's something to say about cultural capability when it comes to professional services and businesses, and how we understand that sort of stuff, and also weight that against another Aboriginal business who maybe is led from someone, you know, who grew up in community, who's very much still connected to community, whose profit margins directly flow on and impact those communities that they're still active and connected into, as opposed to somebody who's, you know, still navigating the early stages of that journey. Because that's a big part of what we talked about, right? The benefit of engaging a Black business is that connection and flow on back into our communities.
Yep.
Whereas for others at the earlier stages of that journey, maybe those benefits aren't as clear, you know?
I think it's a huge conversation. I thought we weren't going to go there, bro. But
We don't have to go too deep, but
No,
I just
we
think for
can,
people
mate. Look,
listening, you know, just to understand the complexity
it's a
of it.
very important conversation, and it needs a lot of people to be part of it. In particular, we need our elders to be heard, because they're talking. They're just not on social media like we are, and, you know, they're not able to access or disseminate information on the same way that others can, you know, but they're still talking.
100%.
You know, and I just wish, like, you know, my nan's on Facebook, so they go all right. You know?
Yeah.
But
they've worked out Facebook pretty good, haven't they?
They have,
Bless?
yeah. But, like, I think this conversation, you're right, the cultural capability, oh gosh, it's absent in so many spaces. And I think that those people who are on their journey, when you see somebody who has, I don't know, I've seen people that have done ancestry.com one day and the next day they're rolling out a business model.
Yeah.
And, you know, then claiming
same.
things like lateral violence when somebody challenges them.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, what we're talking about, it's not about what you claim,
Yeah.
and it's not about who you claim.
Yeah.
It's about who claims you.
That's it.
What country claims you. And
Totally.
that key concept seems to be so missed by a lot of people.
Yeah.
You can't just go around saying you this and that. Like, culturally, that's not how we operate. It's, you know, we talk about Yinjamata, it's slow and it's with respect. And I see a lot of business models missing that.
Yeah.
It's difficult because there are, you know, we've seen the effects of colonisation and stolen gems and other spaces and other things that have destroyed our family units, that continue to destroy our family units.
Totally.
That put people square in that grey area. And that's something for our communities. We are able to connect and reknit that. That's for us.
Yeah.
That's not for others to tell us how to do that.
Totally.
This conversation is not about those people. This conversation is about people who are making claims about who they are and spaces of leadership or voice or business or whatever it is that they feel entitled to stand in, ultimately over the top of other Aboriginal people.
100%.
That's a problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have advice for somebody who's listening to this who maybe sits in that sort of space? Maybe they're in the grey area. Maybe they're at the start of their journey. Maybe they're thinking about getting into business. You know, what would you say? Would you say,
Well, the rules of business is that anyone can get into business, right?
Yeah.
The question is, are you creating a business based on your claim to Aboriginality? Because they're two very separate things. My advice to those people is look at your why.
Yeah.
What's your why? What's your impact? And when I talk about my why, you know, with the support of the trading black members. And, you know, I want to shout out to them mob, like Ginny's Girl Gang, Earth Jinder, you know, Nungala, Millie Cairns, there's 10, so there's a lot. Numpi Weaving, I'm going to forget someone, Gillawara Crystal, I'll remember the others. That core group, we opened the first Aboriginal-owned fashion retail outlet in the country in a Westfields. Never been done before.
I remember that. It's pumping.
And it wasn't about like one person's ego or anything like that. In our store, the first, you know, so proud of that. We had over 20 Aboriginal young people working in our shop that either had never worked in retail before and maybe never thought about it, or did want to work in retail but never felt safe.
Yeah, totally.
So like you talk about impact and you talk about why. That's because they were able to connect in our space. We created a safe space of employment for them. It was a safe space of wholesale retail supply chains. Like we understood what was going on for people. I had personal relationships with almost every single one of those black businesses that we stocked in that 100% Aboriginal brand. If you're a person who doesn't have that cultural capability, how do you do any of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't.
Yeah.
So what's your why?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of that feeds back through to as blackfellas in terms of how we connect and how we do business, or how we connect generally is as a collective, right? And you're talking about that journey and evolution in that sort of space even sounds like a collective journey, whereas when someone is on their own journey outside of community, it's very individual. You know, the business is very, you know, separate. Whereas for us as blackfellas that are really trying to drive impact and outcomes through business and for our communities, there's a level of, I don't know if kinship's the right word, but like there's a community care piece around that where we're connected. And
accountability.
Yes, accountability is the word. 100%.
We're accountable to one another.
Yeah.
And when you don't understand what that means or how it operates, it means that you don't have a business that's based and founded on those cultural ethics and protocols.
That's the one. That's the one.
But just like while we're talking on impact, I got a call the other day from one of the young men that used to work with us. Yeah. And I wasn't expecting it at all. He rang me. I hadn't heard from him because we closed the store January this year because I took on the job with the elders. They're very proud to have done that. But in any case, he gave me a call and he said, I just want to thank you for the years that I got to work in your shop. That time working with Jarren Street and Trading Black changed the trajectory of my family and our lives. Yeah,
amazing.
And that wasn't just me. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like even our store, like we had all sorts of, like we were a collective.
That's it.
So it was like whatever happened, all that magic that happened there, you know, enhanced his ability to make decisions in his life, I'm assuming. But all I can say is I burst into tears and it was way too early for that.
But it's such a tangible and practical example, right, of the power of black businesses and the flow-on effect that you talk. One word that you've used a lot is access. You know, and the access that provides for our people to be able to show up, you know, and get those, you know, have those opportunities or that experience in these spaces and places that sometimes aren't as accessible is something that's really, really powerful. You know, I think a lot about the social enterprise work that like Wildflower are doing, you know, and they got so, you know, the work that they're doing, like a lot of young fellas are there, you know, that probably wouldn't be working in that sort of space if it wasn't, you know, full of black fellas and it was accessible, and they felt like they had a level of, you know, mentoring and support to be able to do that sort of work.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just really, again, reinforces the power of when you're working with businesses that are 100% Aboriginal controlled, you know, like,
I mean, we even have that experience at Wayanga, you know, across the aged care industry, there's like a huge shortage of talent, like recruitment. And it's to the point where the industry's having to recruit overseas. We don't have that problem.
Yeah.
In fact, we don't have enough jobs and money to give to the young ones that want to come and work at Wayanga because they want to be close to their elders.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's like, it's the power of that collective.
Yeah.
And, you know, back to your point about like when someone's, I don't know, coming into their identity and all of that, you know, I just think that like if you can't understand that stuff and if you can't create that stuff, you know, taking up a leadership position, which is what that is.
Absolutely.
Like you're sprinting and you haven't even crawled yet.
Well, you used another word, that accountability piece. Like for me, that's the critical thing as a black fella, if you're going to be taking up space, is that accountability back to community. And if no one knows where they can pull you out from, or, you know, get you know, pull you up about anything too, or, you know, you're not going to see them at when you're taking your kids to dance, or when you see them at the footy, or, you know, whatever that sort of looks like in terms of how you show up in your own community, for your own families. If you don't have that, you know, for me, that's a really critical piece of the puzzle if you're working in these black spaces and if you're taking them up. Because that's the thing, like you see a lot of people that are taking up spaces in identified roles in the public sector, or maybe they're, you know, running consulting businesses or others as well, and they are coming in, making decisions about our communities with zero accountability back to them. You know, and little, if any, accountability to their own countries or communities in some cases as well. And so for me, it's that accountability piece is massive. I think like that's part of your own, like if you know, and like you said, there's a grey area when you're talking about, you know, stolen gen and maybe other sensitive stuff too, but that comes on there, that also becomes a personal responsibility to work out what your accountability then is, you know.
That's
And how do you do that? So like, how are you showing up? Like you can't sit there and put that on our elders or, you know, your country to work that out. That's if you're announcing yourself into these spaces, you also need to be announcing yourself into accountability, because that's a big part of protocol.
Definitely. There's this saying that was drilled into me by my aunties, and for those who know my family, we just call them the aunties because there's so many of them, so people know who I'm referring to. But my grandmother and her sisters, you have to do your apprenticeship first. Yeah. And like you got to earn it. You have to earn that accountability. Like it's not even just about having the accountability. You got to earn that accountability piece as well. And that can't be done overnight.
Totally.
So like I think a lot of people that step into the space in the ways that you're talking about, they see this like that sometimes they're met with this kind of like, I don't know what the word is, but they see it as like a bad thing, and it's not. It's like community telling you you're not ready for this. It's not you. Yeah. Step back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn, listen, be respectful. And they don't hear it. And that's when you see mob getting upset. And that's when you see, like, you talk about people in identified roles, like anybody can say they're Aboriginal and step into an identified role if they have the mainstream qualifications. But do you have your black apprenticeship?
Yeah, that's it. Totally.
And then if you're making key decisions that affect the lives of black fellas in communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you feel like, you know, some of that sort of stuff resonates with you and your journey and where you're on, you know, sit with some of those messages around, you know, accountability, but also, you know, doing the work as well and working out, you know, is this the right time for me to be stepping into these spaces, or, you know, do I need to do a little bit more work on my learning journey, my apprenticeship, you know, my black apprenticeship that Jarren talks to it as.
Or do you step in at all?
Yeah, that's it.
You might not be right to step in at all. It doesn't mean that you can't learn and listen and do all those things.
Absolutely.
You just might not be, you shouldn't be doing that business model, or maybe shouldn't, you know, like.
Totally.
You may never be the right person for that, and that's okay.
Definitely. Yeah, it's funny you use that Ancestry.com example, and I remember I rocked up to this. I saw this event on social media about this like this rock climbing thing that had happened, and it was I won't use the name, but it was like for like black fellas that were into rock climbing, and it looked really cool. And you know, my kids love they'll climb anything, and so I went down and they put on this big event, and it was a really well run event. And I met the lady, like young girl was running it, lovely too. Literally said like, oh yeah, so like about 6 months ago I did my Ancestry.com test and we found out that, you know, X% of whatever is, and I'm Wiradjuri, and
why do they always have to be Wiradjuri?
Yeah.
We know our
That's where everyone was from at that course I was telling you about the other day too. But yeah, it was I just looked at my woman, I was just like, oh, like why? You know, this was going so good, you know, now I don't want to combine it anymore. So we cut out. But yeah. But hey, look, you know, so look, it's a big yarn, but hopefully people listening to it, whether they're connected to it personally or not, hopefully it gives you a bit of context for some of the complexity around this sort of stuff when you're thinking about black businesses, you know, seeking out staff for identified roles, how you start to think about cultural capability and how you understand and look for that as well, and different things like that too. And just conscious of time, I want to talk on, you do a stack of stuff, you know, like, so, you know, you got your work that you're doing with the elders in community, you got, you know, Trading Black, Jarren Street. You also do a stack of like facilitation work, MC work, you're speaking on panels, different stuff like that too. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of that sort of stuff you do?
Yeah. So I think like I grew up watching, like, my nan's my hero, you know, like we're so close still to this day. Shout out to Nan Millie Ingram.
Yeah.
And I grew up watching her. She was just like the craziest innovator and so dynamic and so fearless and just such an entrepreneur brain. And I think that was who I looked up to. So like I think that's been passed down to me too. Yeah. And like I think like having yarns like this and seeing black fellas in other mainstream spaces, that's what drew me to like the MC stuff. I was terrified of public speaking.
Yeah, true.
Not gonna lie, like, you know when you stand up there and your knees start shaking? Yeah. That was me.
Yeah, wow.
I think I always like minimized myself.
Yeah.
But then when I realized, no, like we belong in these spaces.
Totally.
And I always second guessed like what my knowledge base was as well. And then I had to remind myself, like, Nan's my hero. Yeah. This woman knows everything, you know, like.
Totally.
So like if I minimize myself, that's sort of disrespecting her knowledge base because she's passed that to me. So yeah, when I do like facilitating and emceeing stuff, I love it because just having those conversations with anybody and everybody and having fun.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of these yarns, like it's like as mob, especially like say my family, like we like to have fun, like have a joke, have a laugh, kick back, and I think emceeing's fun.
Yeah.
Like you got to muck around and have a good time with it. So for me, it was just something that was lighthearted, fun. You get to dress up. I don't mind you dressing up and, you know, fashion and all of that. So, but yeah, I do a lot of things and I'm across all those spaces. But I think the underpinning foundation of all of those spaces for me is just self-determination. And what does that mean? And if it's an Aboriginal space, that it's led by us. And I hope that the messaging that I put out there into the world, I hope that the way that we represent Trading Black, I hope that is what lands the most with not just our communities, but the broader community, that we are strong, we are capable, you know, breaking all those stereotypes, but like we're funny and we can be silly and we can be business owners and we can be MCs and I can be my gammon bougie fashionista. You know what I mean? Like
100%.
we can be all those things.
Totally.
And, you know, the outcome of that has been what I see in my own children. You know, I've got a 10-year-old who's talking to me about his future digital business plan.
Mad.
He wants to know about insurance and taxes.
Yeah.
I've got a 13-year-old who already has her own business.
Yeah, mad.
And my baby who, you know, she's 6, but like still my baby, you know, she's wanting to work in fashion and, you know, like it's that aspiration piece that I didn't have, but I imagined it. And I did see people around those spaces, but like, just continuing that legacy piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's pretty clear that, you know, you're a real thought and practice leader when it comes to Aboriginal procurement, Aboriginal business leadership, and those sorts of spaces. So it's not surprising that you're starting to take up that space, and we need more people like yourself stepping in there and you know, bringing that knowledge and expertise that you've got through, you know, doing the work to sitting in these spaces and making sure that, you know, decision makers and people in power that have the ability to impact, you know, procurement policies and other parts of this sort of sector are hearing those messages as well. So I think you've, you know, clearly uncovered like something that's a critical piece of the puzzle that more people need to be hearing about and understanding. And, you know, thank you so much for championing it. Is there anything that you want to sort of touch on as we come towards the end? Any sort of final thoughts or feelings and things that you think people might need to think about to take away?
There's a few.
Yeah, mad.
The first is that non-Aboriginal NGOs will never be able to do what an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation can do. Mm-hmm. So please always throw your support behind those community-controlled orgs.
Absolutely.
That 100% Aboriginal-owned businesses means 100% investment and impact. Mm-hmm. And lastly, I think to touch on that yarn that we had earlier, you know, like it is a hard yarn around identity and connection and cultural capability. But I think ultimately, like, there's a place, I don't want to say for everybody, but there's a place that people have in this process. It just might not be the place that they want it to be. Yeah, and absolutely. Whether you've been raised in community and culture with strong connections, and, you know, I understand that not everybody has had that. I get that. It's not to minimise those stories. But on some level, we've all gone through that. You know, like we talked about accountability. My elders have told me straight, not yet, not now, or not you. So, like, if you're feeling some type of rejection or some type of, I call it constructive feedback, but we've all been through it, haven't we? So, those would be my takeaways. And obviously, lastly, like, hashtag buy black this Christmas. Yep, let's go. Research who you're buying from. Yep. Go to the About Us section. Check out the business that you're buying from. And if it's not the right business and it doesn't align with their values, put your purchase somewhere else. Absolutely. Well, I think that was, and I love that message, not yet, not now, not you. I think that gives a nice way to sort of pull that together for people to sort of sit with and think about where they sit in that spectrum of their own journeys. And, Trading Black. Where can people go if they want to learn more about yourself? You're doing a stack load of facilitation, MC work, I imagine consultation as well around procurement and business leadership sort of stuff. Where can people go if they want to follow you, your work, or connect with you personally, professionally? Oh, gosh. So I'd love to say that my LinkedIn page is awesome, but it's not. It's so bad. Anyone want to run it for me? Sing out. I'm on socials. I'm pretty active on Instagram. So Jarin on Instagram is somewhere that you can see what I'm up to, particularly around like that emceeing stuff. Totally. We do have social media pages on Facebook and Instagram for Trading Black. It's at a pause at the moment in terms of our online retail store. we touched on the saturation of market and we touched on the lack of support around this, and we've had some awesome partnerships through the Trading Black journey. We partnered with Meta, we've partnered with other spaces, and we've had some really good impacts with those partnerships.
Yeah, wow.
But those things ran their course, and so we're looking at what we can do into the new year around that advocacy piece.
Okay.
I do think that we achieve what we set out to, which was that circuit breaker and putting it into the public consciousness of how to buy black.
Absolutely.
And then with Jarren Street, proudly just launched our gulling collection, which means water.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's a summer collection there, and in the new year, hoping to launch some more active wear lines. And you can follow Jarin Street on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, watch this space just
Yep.
in time for summer. And maybe by the next time people might see us, Jan will have co-emceed our kids' end-of-year dance recital together. So that'll be a mad yarn too.
Shout out to Brolga Dance Academy.
Let's go.
Yes.
All right, mad. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in and everything you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the yarn, brother, and appreciate you holding space for us to have this yarn. So thank you.
Mad. Thank you. Cheers.